Yancey Stroud had only taken the job because it paid better than teaching high school chemistry. A former community college lab instructor from Nebraska, he'd never expected to find himself on board the intergalactic academic exchange ship Virelia, acting as Earth's official human cultural liaison, which was a fancier way of saying he was a babysitter for alien students with poor impulse control and a fascination with Earth food. The ship's main cafeteria, called the Nutrient Hall, smelled like a mix of ozone, burnt seaweed, and something that reminded Yancey of old gym socks dipped in caramel. He didn't eat there unless he had no choice. Instead, he kept a stash of vacuum-sealed meals from Earth in his quarters, mostly spicy stuff. Real spicy. Stuff that made his nose run and cleared his sinuses better than any decongestant ever could. He was halfway through a bowl of microwavable ghost pepper chili when the door to his suite hissed open. Yancey. Immediate situation, come now. The voice belonged to Silter, a third-year exchange student from the planet Varnock. Silter looked vaguely amphibian, with skin that shimmered between green and silver under the light, and eyes on the sides of its head. It was wearing a lab apron and twitching in what Yancey had learned to recognize as panic. "What happened?" Yancey asked, setting the bowl down and wiping his mouth with a napkin. "There has been contamination. Several of us were exposed. It is unclear how long we have." Yancey stood up fast enough to knock over his chair. "Contamination." "What kind of contamination?" Silter's skin flashed blue. "Radioactive." Yancey bolted down the corridor behind Silter, his mind racing through every possible disaster that could have happened. A breach in the fusion lab, an isotope spill. He grabbed a comm tablet and tapped into the ship's security feed. The footage showed 4 alien students huddled in the Nutrient Hall, one of them doubled over, another fanning his mouth with both hands. A 5th was on the floor, groaning. Yancey squinted at the table in front of them. His leftover chili bowl was sitting right there, lid off, half-eaten. "Oh no," Yancey muttered. A soft chime sounded as they entered the medical bay. The air was thick with antiseptic mist, and the medical officer, a lanky, translucent being named Reeve, was already scanning the students with a quantometer. "I just need to confirm," Reeve said without looking up. "What was inside the container?" "Chili," Yancey replied. Reeve blinked. "Was it weaponized?" "No, it was dinner. Ghost pepper chili from Earth." Reeve's scanning wand halted mid-air. "Ghost pepper? It's a type of chili pepper, one of the hottest. We like spicy food." Reeve turned slowly. "This was consumed voluntarily. I mean, I wouldn't say I offered it to them," Yancey said. "But I left it unattended for like 5 minutes." Silter, still beside him, let out a low warble. It was emitting heat signatures inconsistent with safe ingestion. "We assumed it was either radioactive or corrosive." Yancey sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You thought my chili was radioactive." The scent was. "Aggressive," Silter said. One of the students on the med bed groaned. "I thought my organs were liquefying." Reeve tapped a few commands into the console. "No radiation detected, but elevated capsaicin levels, very elevated. This explains the sweating and the hallucinations." "Hallucinations?" Yancey asked. "He said he saw colors that didn't exist," Reeve replied. Yancey winced. "Yeah, that tracks. It's happened to me once. I accidentally rubbed my eyes after slicing habaneros." Reeve turned back to the students and administered a neutralizer mist. Within minutes, the groaning subsided. The next day, Yancey was summoned to the Cultural Ethics Committee on Deck 7. He stood in front of a semicircle of representatives from a dozen species, each more visually confusing than the last. The chairwoman, a feline like being named Velka, twitched her ears. "Mr. Stroud. There has been an incident involving your food." "I'm aware," Yancey said. "I've already apologized and explained it was an accident." Velka narrowed her eyes. "The food in question was classified by the Varnock students as hazardous. The ship's AI flagged it under potential bio threat. I get that, Yancey said, but it's not a threat, it's cuisine. Some people on Earth enjoy food that's hot, really hot. Hot as in temperature? No, hot as in flavor, it burns, but in a good way. A murmur spread around the room. The representative from the gelatinous Mycleans raised a pseudopod. Why would your species consume substances that simulate pain? Yancey shrugged. We like the rush, endorphins maybe, or maybe it's cultural. You grow up with it, you build a tolerance. Some people make a hobby out of it. The committee exchanged glances. Velka tapped her claws against the console. So you are admitting to recreational ingestion of corrosive chemicals. Not corrosive, Yancey said. Natural, it's a plant. Capsaicin evolved to deter animals, but humans just kinda ignored that. Silter, seated in the audience, stood up. We request formal classification of such substances as biohazardous, for the safety of all students, Velka nodded. Proposal noted. In the meantime, Mr. Stroud, your meals are to be confined to your quarters. No public consumption of spicy cuisine until further notice. Yancey opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Understood. Things might have ended there if not for the incident 2 weeks later. The Varnock biology students had been studying Earth flora in the hydroponics bay. One of them, named Feshik, had gotten curious about the small red pods growing in Yancey's private greenhouse section. Carolina Reapers. Feshik harvested one, dissected it, and against protocol tasted it. By the time Yancey arrived, Feshik was on the floor convulsing, and a second student was fanning him with a leaf the size of a pizza box. What happened? Yancey shouted, kneeling beside him. He said he wanted to understand the flavor profile, the second student said. He said your species exaggerates. He said it was a matter of scientific integrity. Yancey looked at the half-chewed pepper in Feshik's hand. He ate a whole reaper? Half, Yancey sighed. That was an error. Feshik recovered after 4 days of Roman IV fluids and electrolyte therapy. But the story spread fast. Human food was now officially labeled Class 3 biochemical hazard aboard the Virelia. Yancey had to sign a waiver just to cook in his own quarters. Then came the interviews. The ship's student journalism collective, eager for drama, cornered Yancey in the corridor one morning with a camera sphere. Is it true your species consumes weapon-grade biochemicals for fun? The reporter asked, antennae quivering. No, Yancey said. We just like spice. It's cultural. Would you call it an addiction? I'd call it an appreciation. A week later, the headline on the ship-wide newsfeed read, Earth liaison defends addiction to painful food, calls IT appreciation. Yancey groaned when he saw it, but it was too late. The meme storm had started. One image showed a human skull with flames shooting out of its eye sockets, captioned, Spicy cuisine. Earthlings feed on pain. Another showed Yancey calmly eating a bowl of chili while Varnock students ran screaming in the background. He became, unintentionally, a cultural icon. And then, surprisingly, things shifted. Students from the Thalax sector, beings with resilient digestive systems and a reputation for thrill-seeking, started requesting samples. Carefully controlled, of course, under supervision. One of them managed to eat a small sliver of jalapeno without vomiting. The next day, Yancey found a note on his door, requesting enrollment in Earth gastronomy. We wish to understand the fire. So he started a class, informal, twice a week, Introduction to Human Spice Tolerance and Cuisine. He brought in low-level spices first, paprika, banana peppers. The students took notes furiously. He demonstrated how to make salsa, how to seed a chili safely, how to use milk instead of water when your mouth was on fire. Reeve the medic even showed up once just to observe. He left with a bottle of sriracha and a medical disclaimer form. The class grew. Soon, students were trading fermentation techniques, trying to hybridize local ingredients with earth spices. A Yaksari student developed a chili-infused protein paste that became a minor fad. Yancey still had to keep the ghost peppers locked away, of course, but something had changed. He wasn't just the oddball human with the dangerous food anymore. He was a teacher again, And this time, his students were from 12 different planets. Still, he always warned them before the tasting sessions. "Remember," he said as he held up a bright red chili, "this isn't radioactive. It just feels that way." The first sign something had gone wrong was the noise. Not an alarm, not an explosion, just a low, rhythmic thudding that echoed faintly through the corridor vents. Yancey paused outside the door to lab compartment 9B, balancing a crate of dried chilies on his hip. He listened. Thud. Pause. Thud. Then a sharp crash followed by a gurgling howl. He set the crate down gently. Inside, half a dozen students from the Aurolian sector, a species with plum-colored skin and 4 elbowless arms, had gathered around a metal vat the size of a hot tub. One of them was holding a ladle with tongs, trying to corral something that was actively bubbling out of the container. The liquid was orange-red and pulsing. "What are you doing?" Yancey asked, stepping through the threshold. One of the students, a female named Reshka, straightened up. "We are testing a hybrid infusion, your Tabasco fluid with our fermented rootstock." The vat belched a cloud of steam that smelled like vinegar and burnt celery. "You needed my supervision for this," Yancey said. "That mixture could destabilize." "It already has," said another student who had lost all the pigment in his face. A small explosion of sauce hit the ceiling, followed by a fizzing sound as it began to eat through the light fixture. "Okay," Yancey said, backing up. "Everyone out." "We're ventilating." Outside in the corridor, the students coughed and wiped sauce from their tunics as the emergency fans kicked in. The ship's AI, in its usual dry monotone, announced a Level 2 containment cleanse. Yancey turned to Reshka. "What were you trying to make?" "A flavor enhancer." "You described a condiment that causes both euphoria and sweating. We sought to replicate it." "Not by mixing acids with starches that ferment under pressure," Yancey said. "That's how you get mustard gas. Literally." Reshka tilted her head. "But you said your species enjoys the intensity of chemical reactions in the mouth." "Yeah, in the mouth, not in the air ducts." The cleanup took 3 hours. When they were finally cleared to re-enter the compartment, the vat had cooled to a gelatinous mass. Yancey scraped it into a sealed bin and made a note to talk to the supply officer about restricting access to the acid shelf. Later that evening, he stopped by the ship's observation deck, where a few Earth students had posted up with board games and snacks. The view outside showed a slow drift of ice clouds near the edge of a rogue planet's orbit. He sat beside Jun, the only other human aboard who didn't work in engineering. "You hear about the sauce incident?" Yancey asked, cracking open a pouch of dried mango slices. Jun nodded. "Word got around fast. Apparently one of the Aurolian students lost a layer of taste receptors." Yancey winced. "They'll grow back. I didn't think teaching aliens to cook would become a full-contact sport. I didn't think they'd interpret flavor profile as a challenge to molecular integrity." Jun grinned. "You should see what the Thalaxians are brewing, some kind of capsaicin mead." I walked past their quarters and my eyes started watering. Yancey chewed on a mango slice. "At least they're enthusiastic." "Enthusiastic is one word, obsessive might be another." The next morning, he found a message cube on his desk. It was from Reeve. "Yancey, patient intake from Deck 12. Another spice exposure. Non-critical. Recommend you consult immediately." He arrived at the medical bay to find a slender, scale-plated student from the Vraxin territory lying on a diagnostic couch, curled inwards. "What happened?" Yancey asked, pulling on gloves. "He consumed a dried pod," Reeve said, "unidentified, found in one of your crates." Yancey leaned over. "Can you describe the pod?" the student groaned. "Wrinkled, red, smelled like flame." Yancey rubbed his temples. "That's either a Trinidad scorpion or a butla. Neither's meant to be eaten raw." Reeve handed him the pod in a specimen bag. He chewed it, swallowed, then collapsed. "Any airway constriction?" "No, but his heart rate was elevated and his thermal response jumped 20 degrees. He stabilized, but we had to administer sedatives." Yancey crouched beside the patient. "Why'd you try it?" I wanted to see the edge, the student whispered, to understand how far humans go. Yancey stood. We go far. But not without milk. Back in his quarters, he added a lock to the chili crate. Then he reprinted the bold warning label with larger font and a blinking light. It still probably wouldn't stop the more curious students. 3 days later, he was summoned to a symposium on cross-species culinary diplomacy hosted in the Central Forum chamber. He arrived wearing what passed as a formal liaison uniform, black slacks, a navy tunic, and a lapel pin shaped like a ladle. The room was packed. Delegates from over 20 species were present, along with several students from his class. A holographic display floated overhead, cycling through images of human dishes. Vindaloo, kimchi stew, Nashville hot chicken. A tall, insectoid ambassador from the Girani cluster clicked his mandibles. We have gathered to address escalating concerns regarding the cultural diffusion of your species' volatile edibles. Yancey kept his tone calm. We've implemented stricter labeling, increased oversight, and banned unsupervised sampling. Velka, seated 2 rows back, raised a paw. The issue remains. Why does your species find pleasure in what others perceive as bodily harm? Because it isn't harm to us, Yancey said. It's stimulation, controlled discomfort, like jumping into cold water or running a marathon. A gelatinous delegate from the Mycleans undulated in place. Your people voluntarily cause thermal distress to their own mouths. Is that ethical? Ethical? Yancey repeated. It's dinner, Rishkas stood. We seek to understand, not judge, but we require boundaries. One of our group attempted to replicate your curry and created a steam explosion. Yancey nodded. I'll provide safe recipes with measured quantities. An ambassador from the Thalaxians leaned forward. Does your species have a maximum tolerance? A limit? That depends on the person, Yancey said. Some train their bodies to handle more. There are contests, rituals, whole communities built around it. The room fell quiet. You ritualize pain ingestion, the Girani ambassador asked. We call it flavor endurance. Several beings began taking notes. By the end of the symposium, Yancey had been asked to draft a formal codex titled Human Spice Practices, Thresholds, Rituals, and Safe Application. He was also given a new title, Culinary Hazard Consultant Earth Sector. The next week, he began holding safety briefings before each tasting session. Students were now required to wear vapor masks for anything above a Scoville rating of 100,000. They practiced simulated tongue burns using thermal gels. One group even built a heat-resistant tasting spoon from ship alloy scrap. One evening, as he finished cleaning up after class, Silter approached him again. We've begun experiencing something new. Yancey raised an eyebrow. Symptoms? No. Cravings? Silter's skin shimmered with a faint pink hue. You want more? Yes. But not for the pain, for the balance, the contrast. Cold grain, hot sauce, mild bass, sharp accent. It recalibrates the palate. Yancey leaned against the counter. You're talking about flavor layering. Yes. I believe I understand now. It is not punishment, it is architecture. Yancey handed him a sealed container. That's tamarind chili paste. Try it with rice, Silter nodded. We will build. As the door hissed closed behind him, Yancey stared at the empty classroom. Tables scattered with spice trays, printed recipes, and a single half-used jug of oat milk. He never planned to be a diplomat. But here he was bridging galaxies one pepper at a time. Yancey set the emergency burn gel on the counter and exhaled through his nose. The classroom still carried a faint tang of vinegar, citrus, and something that might have been durian. The last tasting session had ended over an hour ago, and yet the air clung to his sinuses like a reminder. He peeled off his gloves, folded them neatly, and dropped them into the disposal unit. Across the room, a trio of Yaksari students were still seated at a table, staring at a half-empty dish of what remained of the fermented habanero custard. Their compound eyes blinked in slow, asynchronous patterns. One of them, the tallest, raised a spoon and said, "It continues to evolve." Yancey didn't look up from rinsing the tasting utensils. That's the lactic bacteria. It's not supposed to be moving, by the way. If it's moving, it's no longer a condiment, it's a liability. We named it, said the one with the yellow crest. It's called Shriek now. He turned off the water. Please don't name your food, especially if it's still active. That's how people end up with digestive regrets and sentient leftovers. They made clicking sounds he'd learned to interpret as laughter. He didn't join in. Wrap it up and submit it to the containment pantry, he said, drying his hands. Label it as experimental, and for the love of gravity, refrigerate it this time. The students gathered their notes and left, still murmuring about microbial personalities. Yancey checked the time. Late. The ship's lights had already dimmed to rest cycle mode, and the floor panels underfoot gave off a gentler glow. He thought he was alone until a soft shuffling sound came from behind the supply cabinet. "Who's there?" A small figure emerged. Short, with mottled gray skin and tiny clawed fingers, one of the new arrivals from the Krell sector. It looked barely old enough to be in the academy. The student held something wrapped in foil. "I require clarification," it said in a voice like dry leaves. This was discovered in the waste bin. Yancey squinted. "That's a chicken wing." "I suspected as much," the student said, "but its remains suggest combustion. Was this a failed fuel sample?" "No, that's just buffalo sauce. It's how we flavor wings." Spicy, tangy, sometimes sweet. The Krell student sniffed the foil cautiously. "It smells confrontational. That's the vinegar and capsaicin. You're not supposed to eat it cold, though." "Why not?" "Because it tastes like punishment and sadness when it's cold." The student tilted its head. "But when warm, it is preferable, debatable. Depends on how reckless you are. I am willing." Yancey sighed. "Sit down. Let me heat it properly." He took the foil, placed it into the rethermalizer, and waited until the unit pinged. When he handed the wing back, the student took a small, deliberate bite. Its gills flared. "I am sweating from the inside. That's normal." "My eyes are pulsating." "Also normal for humans anyway. You still breathing?" The student nodded slowly, chewing with visible effort. Yancey handed it a cup of neutralizing broth. "Sip this. It'll help dilute the burn." The student took a long drink, then exhaled in a hiss. "There is something defiant about this process." "Yeah, that's the point." The student finished the wing with measured bites. "I now understand why it was not merely discarded but entombed," Yancey chuckled. "We do have a flair for the dramatic." The student rose, visibly steadier. "I will report this experience to my cohort. They deserve warning." He watched it shuffle away, still licking its claws. The next day, he arrived at the lab 10 minutes early and found a circle of students already waiting, none of whom he recognized. A tall, broad-shouldered Drexian approached him with a serious expression. "We heard of the wing." Yancey blinked. "What wing?" "The wing that burns." "We request the ritual." "It's not a ritual, look, it's just a spicy snack." The Drexian gestured behind him. 7 others nodded. Each held what looked like a sealed food container. One even brought an apron. Yancey rubbed his temples. "Okay. I'll need to prep a batch and you'll need to sign a waiver." "We accept the consequences." "No, you don't." "That's why there's a waiver." Within the hour, he had the lab's induction grill fired up and a tray of wings ready, basted in a sauce he'd toned down slightly just to avoid another med bay trip. He laid out gloves, safety eyewear, and lactose-based coolant drinks. "All right," he said, addressing the group. "These are considered medium heat by Earth standards, not entry-level but not dangerous. If your species has no known tolerance for capsaicin, I suggest licking the sauce first before committing." The Drexian took the first bite. He froze. Then, with a low grunt, he finished the wing and nodded solemnly. "It has awakened a memory of battle." Yancey turned to the others. "That's not a required reaction." One by one, the others tried. Some coughed. One levitated slightly off the ground for reasons no one could explain. A Crolian student began composing a poem mid-chew about the flavor that struck like lightning but lingered like sorrow. Yancey handed out wet towels and made sure everyone was upright and responsive by the end of the session. He logged the spice level, the ingredient list, and the observed reactions. No burn injuries, no hallucinations. Progress. By the third week, the culinary lab had developed a waiting list. Students arrived with notebooks, heat-resistant utensils, and in one case, a handmade trophy labeled First to Survive Level 4 sauce. Word spread beyond the education decks. A xenoanthropologist from the diplomatic corps requested a private sampling for research. Yancey served him a mild jalapeno chutney over rice. The man wept silently for 17 minutes and declared Earth cuisine a paradox of pleasure and pain. But it wasn't until the ship's captain summoned him that he realized things had gone too far. "Mr. Stroud," the captain said, reviewing a tablet. "There's a report here that a group of students attempted to synthesize a hot sauce using engine coolant and a sulfur root native to Denab 6. Yancey closed his eyes. "They called it fusion fire, didn't they?" "They did. It was supposed to be metaphorical. You're lucky it didn't corrode the floor plating. Are you aware this trend is being replicated on other ships?" "I didn't authorize that." "No, but you inspired it." He sat down. "Look, I didn't plan for this to become a movement. I just wanted to teach them how to not incinerate their own tongues." The captain leaned forward. "And now there are interspecies spice clubs forming alliances, competing for Scoville superiority. I had to personally deny a request to import something called devil's blood." "That's not even food, that's novelty poison." "Exactly." Yancey sighed. "Give me one cycle." "I'll fix it." He started by issuing a ship-wide directive. All spice-related experiments must be registered, supervised, and scientifically justified. No more recreational sauce brewing. No more untested hybrids. And under no circumstances was anyone allowed to simulate combustion for flavor enhancement. He followed up with a final class. Culinary courage versus reckless gastronomy. The students listened. They asked questions, real ones. About balance, about cultural context, about why humans didn't just evolve to eat bland food and avoid all this. He answered the best he could. Because we don't just eat to survive, we eat to feel something, to challenge ourselves. To remember who we are. At the end, he passed out a simple dish. White rice, a spoonful of curry and a cooling cucumber salad. Nothing extreme, just flavor. Nuance. They ate in silence, then applauded. Later that night, he returned to his quarters and opened a sealed pouch of his own. It was nothing fancy. Just a few tamales with green chili and a slice of lime. As he ate, he thought of the first time he'd brought chili to the ship, not realizing it would start a firestorm of cultural upheaval. Now the fire had cooled, but its warmth remained. And no one called it radioactive anymore.